I would love to see how you interpret 17:11 Leviticus. Is that kind of one of the big ones that people are like, what about this? 17 verse 10 says, if anyone of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among them eats any blood, and this is I think, a ESV translation, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. So I think people just maybe reading that would just kind of, it'd be easy for them to assume some kind of like, well, atonement is for the life. And actually, but is this even talking about sacrifices here? Or I don't even know. Oh,
yeah, Leviticus 7. Yeah. So,
okay.
So it's
how do you,
well, for like, there's a guy hit this in chapter 1 and chapter 4, I believe. Right now I have my book open to the chapter 4, but in chapter 1, what's important is the association with the killing of the animal, the slaughter with an animal, as bloodshed in verse 4. So verse 4, it's in the middle of a sentence. So verse 3, if anyone of the house of Israel slaughters an ox or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or slaughters it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before the sanctuary of the Lord, or the tabernacle of the Lord, he shall be guilty of bloodshed. He has shed blood. He shall be cut off from the people. So that association is already saying that what I think verse 11 is answering is, this is me now gliding toward a stance I defend and argue in the book, but then say, maybe not, and I'll go with the atoning function. But it could go either way. So I'll do the one that supposedly is harder, where you're taking the kippur route in Leviticus. Instead of making atonement, it's to ransom their life. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Ransom in verse 11. And so all the scholars who take it as ransom, Milgram, Fetter, Gilders, can't remember off the top of my head, others who take it as ransom rather than atonement, sacrificial atonement. It's because this is the only instance in the whole thing where being guilty of bloodshed is nullified, and that's it's like answering the question: if this is a bloodshed, if slaughtering an animal is bloodshed outside of legitimate sacrifice at the sanctuary, etc., well, then the sacrifice must be making it not a bloodshed, making it not a killing, making it not like homicide. Therefore, God said, I've given you deposit the life, the animal, on the altar. Then that ransoms, that exchange, that removes. You can think of mora as a removal. It removes the threat of death, removes the threat of captivity. It depends what's being removed. But if you kind of have, I argued before from William Gilders, kind of like that, the you can just keep the word kind of vague, like it affects removal. Does it remove contamination? Well, then it's decontamination, sacrificial atonement. Does it affect removal of being liable, your life being forfeit, being cut off because of blood guilt? Well, it's removing that threat. But then we typically would say that's ransom when it has to do with threat of death or things that, all right, it's a ransom. So, but it's not that my life is forfeit already. I did something that makes my life forfeit. I'm liable to get cut off. Shoot, I don't want to die. I know God's not like, oh, here you go. I've given you, kill this animal instead, throw it at my front door, and I'll accept that death as a ransom for your life that was forfeit. No, it's you just killed an animal. This is Genesis 1. We're not supposed to be eating meat. So the concession is still dealt with after the flood of eating meat, taking the animal's life. How are we incorporating the biological death of an animal into our worship of God in a way that doesn't make us liable to the things that our origin stories have told us is proper way to live in harmony with animals, where we're supposed to be vegetarian and all this sort of stuff, and we're not supposed to be taking their life. So the solution is God saying, if you deposit that blood and do this any other way, any other format, bloodshed. Only if you put it on the altar in legitimate sacrifice at my sanctuary will that be removed from you. So making your sacred meals, right here it's dealing with the types of sacrifices at first are the non-atoning ones, the well-being offerings. But then later it talks about other ones. So I think there's nuanced debate. Some of those scholars of the ransom are like, oh, this is only about peace offerings. And some are like, well, look, these other ones are mentioned, so it's about all of them. I think they're right, but it doesn't really matter. Yeah. The point is that when it outside of legitimate sacrifice, this counts as a bloodshed, which means that the legitimate sacrifice is whatever you want to conceptualize it at. It's not being conceptualized as a substitutionary death. Like the life of the offer isn't forfeit first, and then you offer this thing in place of your forfeit life. It's once you kill this thing, what you do next really matters. That's what's happening with this thing. If you deposit it on the altar, then that bloodshed, you're guilty of shedding blood, and it's repeated a bunch in verse 4, and that's removed. I've given it. This is the designation. This is how you can go about your worship and not be liable for bloodshed. So it's not. Does that make sense? Like it's not a substitutionary death for the offender. It's making it so that your slaughter of this animal gets reconceptualized ritually into a sacrifice and not bloodshed, which means sacrifice is not bloodshed. It's not. It literally not. That's the whole burden of that chapter is to address that. And then it goes on to, okay, what about you're allowed to eat clean animals? So what about that? And you can't sacrifice a deer. That would be wrong. So how do we nullify that? Well, okay, you bury it in the ground. That's just what it says to do. You cover it. So it's the proper. What happens after you kill any mammal matters immensely. If it's an animal eligible for sacrifice, then it must be sacrificed. Otherwise, the person who slaughtered it is liable for bloodshed. Once you've ruined the process, you can't then go out for another sacrifice. Oops, I shed blood. Let me kill a second thing and nullify that. Like it's not coming in to remedy a situation in which your life is already forfeit before there was any slaughter of an animal. Yeah. It's the slaughter of the animal itself that is the problem. That's what frames the whole discussion in verses 3 and 4. Leviticus 17:11 is answering on the ransom view. It's answering the bloodshed, the liability of bloodshed in verse 4, and showing how legitimate sacrifice nullifies that charge. The atoning view, which I also offer, and at the time I wrote it, I was like, that's probably it. But again, I could go either way, is that it's offering a reason not only for that charge, but also why it purges. So if you take it as affecting removal of contamination on the sacred space, rather than affecting removal of the blood guilt because you killed the animal, affecting removal of the blood guilt, you'd say ransom. Affecting removal of the pollution on the sanctuary, atonement. Yeah, we're all following? Yeah. So taking that second view, the life then takes on a more like, oh, this is why. All we know up to this point is that the fact that doing these sacrifices, the purging ones, putting it on the horn to the altar in a certain way. I should also, maybe now's a good time. The ones that you eat, the ones that don't have no atonement, have completely separate blood rituals. The blood goes different places depending on what kind of sacrifice it is. If it's a decontaminating kippur sacrifice, it goes on the horns of the altar. The excess is poured down onto the ground. So it either goes horn to outer altar, horn to the incense altar, which is in the Holy of Holies, or it is sprinkled on the veil, and then once a year on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. We only know that. The fact that those blood manipulations purge the sacred space, because that's what it says. That's purging my sanctuary or whatever. Like there'll be these comments. but maybe the question is why. And so maybe if you take the second view of Leviticus 17:11, that it's affecting removal, it's still talking about that removal of contamination from the sanctuary. Well, then the life of the animal is like, oh, it's because we already know from all the ritual impurity stuff that's been dealt with that it's the forces of death. Well, that's how Milgram puts it. I think it's more forces of finitude, like our beginnings and endings, because things that generate ritual impurity aren't just death, but maybe like the ending of life. But maybe we could just talk about like our mortality or something like that, or our corruptibility, and the fact we reproduce. We have beginnings and endings. That's what I say in the book. But either way, so you have death associated things, mortality, finite, finitude, things associated to generate impurity, a contamination on the sacred space. So then the life idea would make sense of, oh, what removes that? Why does it remove that? We already knew that it removed it, but now we know why, because it's life. So life overwhelms the forces of death or the forces of mortality and finitude and things like that. At the time and I still think that does make good sense, but if you take that away and you go the ransom view, well, then you're just left with, these are just divine commands. Why does it affect removal? When you do the purgation sacrifices and all that, well, just because God willed it so. And also, killing any animal is bloodshed. So why are you not liable for bloodshed? Oh, because when you do this in the right way, then God's given it to remove that charge from you, because you've deposited it back where it belongs. So either way you take it, you're not moving the needle on penal substitutionary atonement.